had an interesting thing happen a handful of years ago. And that was a really high performing CEO client that I have. He was asking about his anxiety. He said, I got some anxiety. And what what should I do to find out like where that's coming from? And I thought, well, let me think about that for a second and I'll get back to you. And so I started thinking about it. And I thought, probably be helpful to give him a little list of good questions to ask yourself to go from this global kind of anxiety feeling to making it something you could actually go address. We cure things from first feeling the symptom to going and feeling and looking at the cause, and then we look at the cause, and then we do something about the cause of it. So it can be a little different segment here today, as many times, excuse me, something's coming through the vents here. Many times we're just sort of stuck in the midst of the feeling of anxiety. So this is going to be different. I'm just going to read you questions. I might comment here and there, but I'm not going to give you a lot of download of content about these. But these are questions to ask yourself. Okay. Are you ready? Let's go through these. Are there identifiable external stressors that are unusual or different at this moment in some way? In other words, sometimes anxiety is not chronic, it's coming from a specific stressor. Name what those are so you can get objective about going and dealing with them. Number two, are any of these stressors tied to key relationships that have a particular meaning for you, either personally or professionally? A lot of times we have a situation and we're anxious about that, but when we get below it, it's not really doing a contract that's difficult or doing a project that's difficult or going and joining this committee at church. What's difficult is there's somebody attached to that that really, really causes me stress or has particular meaning in my life. And then ask the question, what is the meaning that they have to you? What's actually in danger? What's threatened? What's scary about them or about dealing with them? Name what that is. Sometimes, well, I'm afraid of their rejection. Okay, well, name that. And then you can go and looking at, well, what would that rejection mean? What do I need to do to avoid that or not fear it anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the next one. What is what if your anxiety is coming just from the sheer quantity of stuff? You're overloaded, you're overstressed. There's got to be some pruning versus qualitative stress. And that means there may not be too much. It's just one or two of these things have particular meaning attached to it, like I said before, or a relationship attached to it. The next one, is there a particular person or persons that really is the source of your stress? Who is who is that? You got to name it. Is the stress coming from external reasons mainly or internal reasons? Pressure from the inside or conflicts from the inside versus outside. I mean, this could be as simple as I was talking to somebody the other day. They were so stressed about this project at home. I mean, this could even go to, the kitchen's a mess, right? And they're so stressed about that. Well, there's nothing de facto stressful about that project sitting there. What's stressful is your internal pressure that's saying, I've got to get this done before I go to bed, or I've got to do this by this, or I've got to. That's not true. But the internal stress of the have tos and the shoulds and the ought tos, and I'm bad if I don't, or somebody's going to be upset, blah, 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 blah. Many, 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 many external things are not stressful in and of themselves until we interpret them in a certain way. I was talking to somebody about it. Oh my God, you got to get through their inbox. They have all these, unopened emails. I said, well, let me check mine. And I had, I don't know, whatever the answer was that day is hundreds and hundreds. There's no way I'm going to be able to check all those. Sorry, but depends on how you interpret that, what it means to you. What is a key fantasy that would make it all go away? If this were true, all of that would go away. Go away. Maybe it's job. Is it you need to a particular hire? Is it that other person, not to hire, but somebody else would go away? Is it that you had a different job? What is it? We can tell a lot from our rescue fantasies that actually have an answer in them to what to do about the reality. What do you see on your schedule that makes your stress go up or makes you want to vomit or is totally de-energizing? I can look at my schedule and I look at some things and I go, oh yeah, and I look at other things and go, oh, talk to the person, or I got to do. That's worth looking at. Sometimes those are have tos and necessary, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes there's ways in which we can, do something about them. Ready for this one? What do you feel responsible for that's outside of your control? When you feel responsible for something that's outside of your control, that is a formula, a definition of stress. 100%. If I'm looking out the window here, and if I felt responsible for whether or not it's going to rain in the next 2 hours, I would really be on pins and needles. I can't do anything about that. If I felt responsible for somebody else's feelings, or if I said no to them and now, they're going to get all upset about it, I can't control that. So look at what do you feel responsible for? Taking responsibility for somebody else's reactions or feelings or outcomes in a project, and you have no control over that. Who do you feel affected by similarly? And they're totally outside of your control. Better look at that. Can't control another person. Here's the next one. Who's filling your tank? You know, as our relationship tank gets filled, anxiety goes down. Relationship, good connection, safety in a relationship is inversely correlated with stress and with anxiety. The more supported we feel, the less stress we feel. So, who's filling your tank? Who, after being with that person, do you feel full, happier, refreshed, energized, relaxed? Name them and when and what it is you do with them, and then ask yourself the question, am I getting enough of that? Who's the opposite? Who, after being with you, feel particularly stressed, de-energized, bummed out, bad about yourself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Name them. Then you come up with some steps, do something about that. If Jesus said that his burden is light, his load is light, his burden is easy, then what of all this stress that you're feeling is not coming from him? Think about that. It's either coming from inside our own heads or coming from some other people. List those sources. Where are you trying to operate outside of your strengths? And is that an actual requirement? When we operate inside of our strengths, it's generally not very stressful. But if we're doing a lot of having to operate, sometimes seasonally that's required. But if we've kind of constructed life as I'm having to do a bunch of stuff and I just suck at it and I'm not good, it's just going to cause me a lot of brain damage. Where's my next one? Who do you have around you that you secretly wish would just go away? Name them. Sometimes you can go away from them. You do have control over who you go hang out with a lot of times. Sometimes you don't, and then there's other strategies, but you need to figure out who that is. What is lying, quote, out there that feels threatening? How? Is it outside of your control? That's when we surrender it. How? Is it outside of your control? Name it. If it's inside of your control, then we can take some steps to do it. I mean, we all have stuff like this. It's just hanging out there. Like I'll give you an example. I've got some all sorts of stuff in projects that I've been putting off for a little bit. And, I'll wake up and think, oh, it's out there. It's hanging out there. I'm going, Henry, it doesn't have to hang out there. You do have control of going and finishing those, and then you wouldn't have to think about them anymore. A lot of times we just have storm clouds hanging out there, and they are inside of our control. Are you getting the rest and relaxation that you truly need? I don't know this, can't remember the source of this, but I think this is true. If it's not, the idea is true. But I do know this is true, that when they research the highest performers in life, they all have one thing in common. They sleep more than anyone else. Now, there's exceptions, but even the exception, well, I don't need, I do well. I'm a high performer and I only get 5 hours a night. Great. Let's put you in a sleep lab. And what they do is then they're getting all the sleep they need. Their performance even goes up. So even if you are able to perform well on 5 hours, you have no idea what you could do if your brain were rested. And that's an important thing to do. We know so much more about sleep now and how important it is to health and anxiety and cortisol levels and all of that kind of stuff. Here's a good one. Where do you feel like you are falling short of your expectations or the expectations of others? How are you falling short? That's a really good question because sometimes that's a good thing. Those expectations are not bad. And there's a gap we feel, I know I ought to do better here. I need to do better, and I'm not doing it, but we're not facing that. And that, reality will talk to us unless we're in complete denial. So sometimes those expectations are good to go start to figure out a way to meet, even the expectations of others. But a lot of times they're not. They're goofy expectations that you have that you put on yourself that should not be there. Name those. You may be comparing yourself to somebody else. It doesn't even apply. Whatever. Or other people expect things from you that tough. I mean, you didn't agree to those expectations. You don't have to take on expectations that are other people's. We had a call on the show yesterday. A woman had a sister-in-law who was really, really mad at her and expecting that her the woman on who called in, her husband, sister of the woman who was her sister-in-law, the woman brother-in-law, who's the woman who was angry, had expectations that he was going to be spending as much time still with the family and family of his origin as he was with his wife. She was, struggling with those expectations. I said, yeah, turn to your sister-in-law and say, yeah, that's sad. He won't be spending as much time with you guys as he used to because he's married now. You don't have to take on other people's expectations. How are you isolated and cut off from the activities? I talked about the people before, but how about activities that fuel you? How much of the time? I learned this. I've always been a competitive golfer, played a lot of golf regularly, a lot of tournaments up until when we had kids. And I realized I can't play at the level that I want to play at and be a good dad. And so when the girls were born, I quit. And there were a few other reasons for that, but I just realized I can't play at the level I want to and be a dad at the level I want to. And so I quit. Well, what I didn't realize, even though that was the right and a good decision, and I did that for 17 years, 16 years, but I didn't realize that it left a vacuum that I used to have a regular Wednesday afternoon game. I showed up at 12. I blocked my schedule out and I had a Saturday game that I played in. Well, when those went away, guess what happened? Like water rolling into a ditch, work just filled up Wednesday afternoon and work every and just because I wasn't playing golf anymore, it turned out I kind of wasn't doing anything activity wise apart from parenting and work and all the stuff you got to do that really fuels me. You might be cut off from activities that fuel you. Here's one. Who do you feel controlled by? Who? Name it. That's the problem. Related to that, who do you resent? Why? How have they gotten you cornered into having to put up with something that you're not saying no to? What hurts? The anxiety comes sometimes from unresolved hurt and trauma. What makes you sad to think about or talk about? And who are you talking about it to? Sometimes we're talking to the wrong person, it makes it worse, but we need to be talking to somebody about it to make it better. And then one last one. What are you currently going through that triggers old pain or trauma or anxiety? What are you being reminded of? This is sort of, PTSD and a cousin of PTSD where we just, there's unresolved stuff that's still in us that it would be really, really good to look at and deal with. Okay, there's some questions for you. I hope I've added to your day by making you look at some stuff. Hopefully, it's not making you anxious, right? It's letting you, helping you be aware where the anxiety is coming from.